Visual scanning and collision avoidance. So, what is visual scanning? This is just a technique that we use for pilots to look outside the cockpit to be able to pick up traffic and any other kind of potential threats like birds or other planes. Why we need to scan? It's mainly to avoid any kind of mid-air collision or to maintain a safe distance from any kind of traffic that's going to be around us. See and avoid is the responsibility of every pilot, whether they're on an IFR or VFR flight plan. If you're on an IFR flight plan and you have any kind of visibility, it's your responsibility for see and avoid. Otherwise, it's going to be on ATC. How to scan for traffic. So, how you're going to want to scan for traffic is you're going to divide the sky into 10-degree segments, and you're going to focus on each segment for approximately 1 second and just go from left to right or right to left, whichever way works for you best, to be able to pick up traffic. And the reason that you want to do that is you're going to be using your peripherals actually to focus on anything that's going to be in these particular segments during this time that you're scanning back and forth. And this is going to, by doing this, you need to make sure that you're giving your eyes enough time to focus on each 10-degree segment as you're looking at it. So just to break down the reaction time and really how important this is and how quickly things can go wrong. For you to see an object takes about 1/10 of a second. And then for you to recognize, let's say, an aircraft, that's going to take you another second, or take you 1 second. And for you to realize that you may be on a collision course with another aircraft could take 5 seconds. And then for you to decide which way to turn could be another 4 seconds. And by the time your muscles are reacting to what your brain is telling it to do, that's another zero point 0.4 seconds. And then by the time the aircraft reacts from what you told the aircraft to do, that's another 2 seconds. So from beginning to end, before you've seen anything, when you started looking at something to when you are finished reacting to it, could be 12 and a half seconds. So it's a lot of time for things that could go wrong. So it's very important to be constantly seeing and avoiding and visually scanning. When you do see a potential hazard, it's very important to take immediate action. There's, just as I explained with these time intervals, there's no time to mess around. For clearing procedures, this needs to be done during all phases of flight, whether that's taxiing, taking off, landing, climbing, descending, all phases of flight, you need to be doing clearing procedures, whether that's looking left to make sure nothing's coming from the approach end of the runway, or looking down the runway to make sure nobody's on there. Or it could be doing small, shallow S-turns as you're in a climb or descent. And some schools even have procedures in place where you have to do 90-degree turns in opposite directions before you start any maneuver. That's how my school is. There are also a lot of blind spots on airplanes. If you're flight training, you are probably going to be in a Cessna 172 or something similar to it. Just a high wing tricycle gear airplane. And with a high wing, you've got restricted visibility above your wing. And when you're going to be turning into, just a second, I'll show you an airplane and explain this better. So with a high wing, if you are turning, that's going to be an entire blind spot on the side that you're turning towards. And if this was a low wing, so we could just flip it upside down for sake of me not having another airplane. And in a low wing, that's going to be beneath you as you're turning. So there's a lot of blind spots associated with flying. And then another thing that's very important is make sure you have a clean windshield at all times, because a hazy or dirty windshield could really disrupt your view, and that could lead to accidents that are just not necessary. It's easy to clean your windshield. There are areas that are associated with greater risk. So VORs are a really prominent area because there's going to be people practicing tracking VORs. They're going to be going to the station or from it. And if a lot of people are in that area, they may not be looking outside because they're focused on the CDI needles and keeping it lined up to where they're staying on course. So it's really important to have a safety pilot that's always looking outside and somebody that's paying attention outside. Another one is an alert area. This is going to be an area that's got a very high volume of training. So here in Waco, there's not an official work alert area, but there is a designated practice area that it's well known that there are a lot of student pilots out there learning how to fly. So there's a traffic or there's a company frequency out there that's going to allow you to find out what everybody else is doing. So that's how we mitigate that risk. Another thing is going to be traffic patterns. So in a traffic pattern, you've got a lot of different airplanes at the same altitude that are having to maintain visual separation with the assistance of a control tower, if that's available, or not if you're in a non-tower environment. There's also congested airspace that is going to be another factor. So if you're in a class Bravo, especially, you're going to be getting different vectors to go to fly different headings or fly different altitudes almost constantly. And you really have to be paying attention on the frequencies to find out what you need to do, and also scanning during this whole time because you are going to see a lot of other aircrafts in a class Bravo airspace. But this could also happen in a Charlie, a Delta, or an Echo even. I've personally had an experience with a very congested traffic pattern in a Class Echo airspace at an Echo airport. So it could happen anywhere. Recognizing different aircraft performances is another thing. Right-of-way rules. So it's said that if you are on a collision course with another aircraft, 91-113 says this actually, that you're both supposed to turn to the right. So if this airplane is coming this way, my hand is coming this way, they would both turn to their right, and that would avoid the collision. If you see something that you think if you see an airplane that's at the same altitude as you, and it doesn't look like they're moving at all, but they might be getting a little bit bigger, that's when you can tell that you're on a collision course and you need to immediately act to avoid that. Conditions that can degrade your vision. So we're going to talk about some physical and physiological factors with this. Having an increased workload is going to decrease your vision because that's going to put some stress on you to where your brain isn't able to pick up things that it should normally be able to see because you're in a high workload environment with a lot of stress. It's also important to stay fit for every flight with proper nutrition and refraining from drug and alcohol abuse. And then also carbon monoxide is a huge issue with this. They could degrade your vision from some of the side effects of these things. So that's something to really be paying attention to. Environmental things that could happen. So flying at night, you're supposed to give yourself 30 minutes to let your eyes adjust to dark and avoid having any kind of white lights or any kind of bright lights. They're going to mess up the vision that your eyes have grown accustomed to for night. So at night, you're also going to be using mostly your peripheral vision to be able to see because you've got blind spots in the very center of your eyes. So you're using your peripherals to pick up and focus on objects, especially when flying. Something called empty field myopia. Your eyes could be relaxed if there's nothing out there, it's just completely pitch black. Or if you're maybe above a cloud layer or there's a lot of haze or something, your eyes are going to relax and the distance that they're able to pick up is going to decrease. And you can actually be scanning and looking without seeing what's out there. So that's something that can be very dangerous as far as environmental things go. Now let's talk about illusions. So we talked about illusions and aeromedical factors, and we're kind of going to hit it again. So with your inversion illusion, it all goes back to how the fluid in your inner ear reacts. And with the inversion illusion, if you're changing from a climb to straight and level flight, kind of pitching over, you could get the sensation that you're tumbling backwards. And a lot of times, a pilot will try to combat that by going into a nose low attitude. I mean, it's going to just intensify that illusion and make you think that you're tumbling backwards even more. Now, with the Coriolis illusion, that fluid in your ear canal is going to start moving at the same speed that the ear canal is also moving. So it's going to make you think that you're not turning when you are, in fact, turning. And then when you move your head in a different way than you were turning, you're going to set that going in the opposite direction, and it's going to set that fluid moving. And when that happens, you're going to get the illusion that you're like turning or accelerating on a totally different axis than you actually are. With an elevator illusion, this is just you're flying along and you get an abrupt upward movement, or you may be flying along and then you feel like you've got a downdraft. And this is going to give you the illusion of being either in a climb or a descent. With a false horizon, you are really losing what the actual horizon is. You may see a line of lights that are going like this, and then you may see a line of lights that are going like this. And that line of lights could be a false illusion that's going to make you think that you're going straight when in fact you're banking towards the ground. With the leans illusion, you are in a prolonged turn. It's very similar to the Coriolis illusion, to where your body thinks that it's still in a turn, and you were maybe in an unnoticed turn for so long that you were in that situation that when you try to correct it, you're going to think that you need to go back to that turn to go to straight and level flight, and that's going to make you bank in the opposite direction. Now, with autokinesis, that is when you're flying at night and there's a really bright star, maybe, or it's a planet, satellite, something really bright. And the longer you focus on that light, you're going to start noticing that it might look like it's moving. But that's just an illusion called autokinesis. Now, a graveyard spiral is the kind of the same thing with the leans and Coriolis illusion. It's going to be you're in a constant rate turn that's prolonged, and it's going to give you that illusion that you're not turning. And then when you're trying to recover from that, you could go in the opposite direction and give yourself too much bank. And it kind of just builds on each other from here. You get too much bank, and then you start losing altitude because you start losing lift. And then when you start losing lift, or when you start losing altitude, you want to gain altitude, so maybe you pull back on the controls. Well, when you pull back on the controls, you could tighten that spiral, which would turn it into a graveyard spin. So now you have the chance of stalling the aircraft, going into a spin, and also your body not knowing which way is up. So it's just a recipe for disaster. That's why they call it a graveyard spiral and a graveyard spin. Now, semi-autogravic illusion is when you are in maybe a high-performance aircraft and you go full throttle, and it gives you that sensation of getting pushed back into your seat, and that's going to give you the illusion that you might be in a nose up attitude, but you're still on the ground even though you got pushed back. And trying to correct from that, whether that's the feeling like you're getting pushed back or pushed forward if you decelerate really quickly, you could go into a stall because of that. So it's important to recognize that illusion. And with preventing these illusions, it's really important to train to recognize spatial disorientation and be able to fly just relying solely on your instruments. Now that we've talked about different illusions that you can experience in flight, let's talk about landing illusions you can have. So a big one is runway width. If you have a narrower runway, here in Waco, we've got a really narrow runway at Marlin, and it's the airport identifier is T15. And when you're going into Marlin, it's going to look like you're higher than you actually are, which is going to make you possibly have to go around, or maybe not low enough to land. So it's really important to be aware of these things and really checking your altimeter. With a wider than normal runway, so you're maybe used to being at Marlin, and then you want to come over to TSTC where we got a really wide runway. Now all of a sudden it's going to look like you're lower than you actually are, and that's going to give you make you want to fly a higher approach maybe. With runways and terrain sloping, so not all runways are perfectly level. Some of them slope up or some of them slope down. If it's sloping up, you can always think up is going to be at a higher altitude. It's going to make you think you're at a higher altitude, but you're really lower. And then when you're on a downsloping runway, you're going to think that you're lower, but you're really at a higher altitude. So that's something to really keep in mind. Now with a featureless terrain, so we call this a black hole approach, and that's when you can't see anything at all besides just the runway. It's going to give you the illusion that you're at a higher altitude than you really are, so you're going to want to fly lower, which is very dangerous. This might happen in a place where there's water on the approach end of the runway. You can't really see anything. And then another one is haze. Haze is going to give you the illusion that you're at a greater distance or that you're higher than you think you are from the runway. And then fog could give you the illusion of pitching up, and that's getting into being in IMC conditions and really just having to really focus and rely on your instruments for everything. With ground lighting, there is the illusion of thinking that there's less distance between you and the airport. And I've experienced this. If it's really dark and you've got a super bright runway, you may think that you're right there, but it might take you 10 minutes to get there because it's so far away, but it looks like it's very close. So all of these illusions are real, and you should treat them like they are real because they are, and that's why we have to learn about them. And with preventing these illusions, it's best to just be prepared to experience this. Just recognize the situation that's at hand and know that you should be expecting this. And always be checking your instruments, especially your altimeter. Make sure you've got the proper altimeter setting in. And then use auxiliary instruments that are going to be on the ground, like your PAPI or your VASI lighting. These things are going to help you to avoid falling victim to some of these illusions. That's my lesson on collision avoidance and scanning techniques.